It might have some difficulties in hearing at times, but your understanding will be greatly appreciated. So without further ado, let us start the session. I would like to first of all invite Mr. Ito, Director of the Center for Radical Transformation at Chiba Institute of Technology, to say a few words.
Konnichiwa. Welcome, and I'm going to speak in Japanese today because we have more Japanese listeners. But please use the translation if you can't understand Japanese.
Neurodiversity Salon is the title of the seminar series that we're starting. And the term neurodiversity, this is something that will be covered by other speakers later on, but when I was the head of MIT, diversity is very important, had always been talked about. Of course, competitiveness and also for better performance, diversity is important, and also social fairness is also very important, and neurodiversity was a very important term for MIT. It's not a figure that is surfaced, but according to a professor for mental health, students of MIT, 60 to 70% are autistic, according to some statistics. And these autistic students, to be able to study in a comfortable environment, is being created. And myself, as well as my students, are on the spectrum, and I also had a sense that my own father was on the spectrum as well. And so these are very students with certain characteristics, but when they are in the right environment, they shine. Genius, I think, are almost 100% are autistic, but not all autistic children are genius. And so it's very important to unlock the potential, but there are challenges in the developmental stages, and we need to have the right environment in society. Places like MIT is important, but we need to include everyone in the society. So when we talk about neurodiversity, it's also about having a place like MIT, but also having a beneficial environment for anyone to join. MIT, 98 have of the Nobel laureates have graduated from MIT, whereas it's much few, only 29 in Japan. And I've come back to Japan for the first time in a few years, but I feel that Japan is an environment that is trying to create well-disciplined children. It's not good for creating fair society, and it's not good in creating Nobel laureates either. And so, well, having said that, here in Japan, we're already seeing some movements. Neurodiversity movement have only taken off in the United States only very recently. And Seiko Noda, I was speaking with her, the politician, very recently, and she was also talking about her own child out in public. And my also child is autistic. I'm very blessed with that. I'm able to apply my own study at MIT to my own child. And I've gone through experienced a lot of therapies in the United States. The traditional educational system has problems and I encountered a floor time just out of coincidence, which focuses on play, as we did at MIT. Focuses on play, and it created a very good synchronized, and therefore I'm very much looking forward to Jeff-san talking about floor time today. And my daughter came back to Japan, and I felt that Japan is very much behind, and looking for a school where my daughter could join. There wasn't a good place, and I thought that Machino Hoikuen is a great place. And I also met with Rizuki-san, and we're sort of kicking off this idea of implementing this idea across the society. So I'm looking forward very much to giving the presentation and listening to the presentations today. Good morning, everyone. As was mentioned by Joy-san, I am Rizuki Matsumoto, running the Machino Hoikuen Community School. Very close to where we are today, there is a Yoyogi Park. And in the Yoyogi Park, have a community school that is a mixture of nursery school and kindergarten. It's a certified early childhood education community school. So who am I? Maybe I could start from there. Involving the whole community. I call ourselves Machino Hoikuen, which is a nursery school for the community. We want to connect with the society, with the community, for the sake of early childhood education. And I have a strong belief that nursery schools could offer a community for people. That's why there is a cafe, and there is a community coordinator who would create a network of bringing together different people who are living in the community. I will not be going into the details of this, but we have 5 locations, and the one that is very close to here, in Yoyogi Koen, we are collaborating with the University of Tokyo in conducting research, and also the Reggio Emilia style of approach is being pursued in our center. Reggio Emilia is early childhood education approach from Italy, and it has a network across many countries around the world. So Reggio, if I start talking about this, it will take hours, but simply put, I think it consists of 3 things. One is that we want to think about the children. We also need to think of who they are, where they're coming from, and they have their own unique intelligence that has to be nurtured and fostered. That's at the foundation of Reggio Emilia. And the school environment is beautiful. It's very creative and artistic. And art is not necessarily a program. It's one of the approach of building intelligence that I think is characteristic of Reggio Emilia, recognizing that people are beautiful. This is at the root of Reggio Emilia. And another point is community. There are 2 aspects of community. One is that the children are exposed to different sets of values, way of thinking, way of looking at things and living. And the other is creating a democratic place where we think about the rights of children as a community. So that's why we've launched this Neurodiversity Salon, and we want to give a boost to this movement. Promoting and making a neurodiverse society here in Japan is what we would like to promote. And I think many of you will understand this. Neurodiversity is something that will lead to the well-being of individuals. And as Joy-san mentioned, it's also a very important philosophy to bring forward the society and communities. For example, in the nursery school, when I spend time with my children, I strongly feel certain things. For example, when I ask the children, what colors make your heart warm? I would feel that a warm kind of color, a reddish color, that comes to my mind. But some of the children would say that I would feel warm looking at the color of the sea, for example. And I thought that kind of individuality is wonderful.
There is no ordinary person. People have different perspectives. There are a lot of individuality. And the perspectives of each person and each intelligence is something that we need to focus on, which is the foundation of the approach. And this child, I would like to introduce this child related to color. We have 3 primary colors. We all know that all the colors are created from the 3 primary colors. We have that knowledge. But when you're told to create those colors, it's not easy. But this child has very high interest in color, and he has very good terms with color. So, for example, using pipettes, he would mix different colors to replicate different colors. In a very short period of time, he was able to create all of these colors. So just like using language, using words, he can play with these colors. I really envy him. So I'm sure he sees the world a completely different way from the way I see the world. So to a certain extent, everybody has unique ability or atypical intelligence. It's something that we are quite certain about when we are working at a community school. So each person, every person has atypical intelligence. So needless to say, the traditional education, traditional society always wanted standardization. But what we would like to create going forward is to expand creativity. So in that sense, diversity is going to be an extremely important concept for us. So specifically, how we're going to promote neurodiversity in the society, this is something that I've been discussing quite passionately with Joy-san. I believe that there are two approaches. First is creating environment for learning. To push with neurodiversity, we need to create environment for learning. So Jeff-san is here today, and he's going to make a presentation later on. And what we think is important is an approach focused on play. So I would like to deepen my understanding on this, listening to Jeff's presentation later on. And also developing atypical intelligence is something that I would like to value as well. And of course, social justice perspective is also important. So we first point is to create the environment for learning. And the second is movement. We need to deepen the understanding of the society. If not, we will not be able to expand this movement in the society. To do that, children, parents, therapists, connections between these stakeholders need to be deepened. And also, Joy-san, he's talking about join all the time in Web3 concept. So different perspectives, different ideas in the society, people who are doing different jobs need to be involved to create a movement. So by having participation everybody, we can bring a momentum to the movement. And Seiko Noda-san, as she mentioned, could probably expand this movement nationwide. So creating environment for learning and creating a movement both of the approaches should be taken simultaneously. And Joy-san and myself is working to realize the concept hybrid school. So what we mean by hybrid school is we talked about children with ADHD and autistic children, but not limited those children. We need to create a school that can involve all children. So the core of hybrid school is that we need to have an atelier or studio in the core, where people's perspectives, the way children feel, can be accepted. A creative environment, just like Reggio Emilia approach, the way people recognize things could be more diverse. And inside the atelier, expressive language can be used to encounter the world or the knowledge. So the children do not only learn things through languages, but non-language media could be utilized, because people through different expressions try to understand the world, try to communicate with the people around them, and also try to understand themselves. So I'm sure that there are different expressive languages that each person is good at. So this is something that I would like to deliver to the children. So this is what the framework looks like. DIR is something that will be covered by Jeff-san's presentation later on. So first of all, we need to value the individuality, the individual personality of the child, what kind of cognitive characteristic the child may have, what kind of perspective the child has, and create an atelier where children can be passionate about finding out or exploring what he or she likes. And play is also very important. Children will voluntarily be involved in the play, and as people are engaged in the play, they start exploring. And so when they start exploring, projects will be created. And to create project, this is something that Joy-san, I talked with Joy-san, and this is something that Odori Tan-san mentioned, purpose-based learning. So as things would start from intrinsic motivation of the children, and also we would like to connect that to the advancement of the society. And as we work on this, of course, if we are to play with the children or to create project, peers and partners are very important. And to do that, we need to establish the community. We need to establish a network of the therapists. We need participation of the parents. And of course, peers are also going to be very important. So I'm kind of rushing. However, this framework is... I think it has a very good affinity with the floor time that Jeff-san is going to present later on. So this is something that I would like to develop. So this is the kind of concept that we have as we try to come up with the hybrid school. So hybrid school, we would like to develop, and at the same time, it's not just school, but people learn from different things, and people experience different things as well. And all these learnings can be connected. So connected learning, this is something that Joy-san's young sister is working on. That kind of idea could be used so that we don't limit ourselves in the schools, but we can work to expand the learning of the children to the outside of the school. So diversity of intelligence and a creative learning approach that is open to everyone is something that we would like to realize. So now that we have started Neurodiversity Salon, what is going to be important for us is the participation. So we do have many people participating. We have many people with different specialities participating. And with your participation, we would like to create the learning environment and also to bring momentum to the movement that we would like to expand. So it was kind of a rush, but that is all for me. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to invite CEO of International Council on Development and Learning, ICDL, Mr. Jeff Guenzel, to make a presentation. Over to you, Jeff-san.
Thank you. So welcome everyone, and that was absolutely a beautiful presentation in regards to neurodiversity and the way we think about things from a floor time perspective. So my goal today is to introduce you to DIR and to floor time, but also to talk about why we approach development and learning the way that we do. So I'm going to start by talking about what DIR is and what floor time is. So DIR is the theoretical framework. It's a framework that's been around for over 30 years, developed by Dr. Stanley Greenspan, and it's a way of understanding how human development happens, in particular, social emotional development. So the D of DIR is about the developmental process that all humans go through. It's kind of like the roadmap of how development happens from the moment a child is born and through the lifespan. The I, the individual differences, are the unique ways that each one of us are wired, or the differences in our biology, the differences in each one of us and how that can impact development. For most individuals, we don't think too much about it. Our individual differences impact our developmental process, but we don't really think that much about it. For individuals that are more neurodivergent or more neurodiverse, those individual differences can have a significant impact on the developmental process. And the relationship-based part, the last part of this DIR framework, is understanding that humans develop in the context of relationships with other people. A baby is born dependent upon relationships with other people for survival. Relationships fuel development. So I use the analogy of the D being like the GPS. It tells you where you're at on your developmental trip and where you expect to go next. The I is like the part of the app that tells you about the road conditions, where there may be construction and you have to take a different route to get there, where there may be weather conditions and you might have to drive a little differently and a little slower, but it just tells you about the conditions along that trip. And the R is the power in the car, is the fuel in the tank or the power in the battery cell that drives development forward. So that's the framework, the theoretical framework that floor time is based on, is understanding how humans develop. So then floor time is taking that understanding and putting it into practice. How do we help our children develop and grow, in particular when they have individual differences that are more complicated or more pronounced than the average child? And we do that through relationships. So some key ideas to floor time and to this DIR process is that the children that we're working with are much more than just what we're seeing on the surface. We see behaviors, we can identify behaviors. A child with autism may be flapping their arms, but that flapping of their arms is just a behavior. What we want to understand is what's happening underneath that behavior, because there's all sorts of reasons why that hand flapping may be happening, or any other behavior that we see. It is one of the biggest problems with how the world has thought about autism is that people have thought about it as challenges in behaviors and learning. And it actually is neither one. It's processes that are happening underneath what we are seeing on the surface. So the changes that hand flapping may be to help regulate, help the body be calm, to manage anxiety, to manage the tension of the sensory input. The lights, the way the lights are coming down upon me for someone with autism may be very, very overwhelming because of the way the brain is wired. So it's seeking to understand what is happening underneath. And then everything is focused around what we refer to as affective interactions, relationships with other people. We know that human communication, that more than 90% of communication is other than the words that we use. It's all of the nonverbal communication. Well, what's happening in that 90%? A lot of that is affective communication. It's emotional signaling. It's emotional communication that's happening. How you feel about someone else that you meet. Even in this presentation, there's a certain amount that in my first few minutes of talking, you have some feeling about me. That is not just what I'm saying. It's about this other part of the communication and how you feel someone else. So that is a big part of how we develop. Back to that idea of a young baby. A baby is born, comes out of mother's womb, and is crying, is distressed. What does mommy do? Mommy holds baby and helps the baby get to a calmer place. We don't treat that crying as a behavior that the baby needs to learn how to interact with the world and not cry. Mommy holds baby and shares her own calmness, the best that she can get at the time, and shares that with the baby to help the baby feel regulated, to feel calm. And so that's the developmental process. That begins from the moment the child's born through the lifespan. We develop through these interactions with other people. Fundamentally, we know that every individual is different. And again, for our individuals on the autism spectrum and with other differences in neurodiversity, differences in the way the brain of each individual is wired, you'll see more significant differences with individuals that are neurodivergent. And finally, the idea of floor time is to develop the core developmental capacities. It's not about just teaching. It's not about having children learn certain things. It is about helping them develop the core capacity to be able to communicate. However that communication happens, whether it's with words or without words, we want to develop that core capacity for communication. The core capacity for thinking and reasoning and problem solving. So information in this world that we live in is very easy to come by. We can get information on the internet about anything. The challenge for even the average person is, how do you think and reason through that information? What's good information? What's bad information? What's helpful? What's not helpful? What's biased and what's not biased? How do you sort through that? You sort through it well if you've developed a core capacity for thinking and reasoning. Then getting the information's easy. And then you can do something with the information. If you struggle with that core capacity of thinking and reasoning, then getting more information doesn't necessarily help. So everything in floor time is developing these core capacities, and I'll talk a little bit about the brain science behind that. So we talk about these three primary channels into the mind and into the psyche. And the three main channels into the mind are affect, the emotional communication that happens, and how our body processes that information. The way we think, our cognition, and our behaviors, all the things we do in the world and behaviorally interact with the world. Those that work with children often think of behaviors as just good or bad, but behaviors are all the ways that we interact with the world. We often like to focus on cognition and behavior because in some way it's easier to see, it's easier to measure. I can give a child a cookie when he does something good and reinforce that behavior, and I can see it in front of me. But affect, this emotional process, is a little bit harder to measure. It's a little bit harder sometimes for people to understand, but it is incredibly powerful when you do, because the affective channel into the mind connects into the brain in a much deeper way than just how we think or how we behave. I don't want to get too far into the brain science of it, but if you think about the idea of, if you have a problem or a challenge in life, you can think about it and think about the challenges, But many times people will talk about meditating and meditating about what's going on. What does meditation do that's different than just thinking about it? By meditating, we get our whole body kind of connected in. What we are triggering are the more subcortical parts of our brain that feel the world. That little boy in the last presentation with the colors, how the child felt the colors. That wasn't a thinking thing, that was a more subcortical feeling aspect about the colors. And so when we're connecting in at that base level, when at a meditative level, we're connecting into the more subcortical parts of the brain, when we're connecting in with floor time in this DIR process, in many ways, we're connecting into the brain very differently at a core level. And when we develop those capacities, even physically in the brain, from the bottom up, from the brainstem up, we actually are building the capacity then for the upstairs part of the brain, the cortex, to do what it needs to do, to be able to process information much more effectively. And there's research to support this, research specifically on floor time, that we've seen the before and after effects of this process. So it's hard for people sometimes to think about what is really happening in these joyful interactions, in the fun that we have in floor time, and are you actually teaching something? And what I'll often say is what we're doing may not always be about teaching a skill, but we're building the capacity for the human to be able to interact with the world and interact with the widest range of the world possible. And that's where our connection with neurodiversity and the neurodiversity movement has been so interconnected with floor time. The autistic self-advocacy community in the United States very much embraces our work, and we work very closely with some of the largest autistic self-advocacy organizations in the States, because we appreciate the difference in how people's brains work, and our goal is not to change that, but to help it go out and to grow. So that little boy that had the experience with the colors in the last presentation, some people might see from a behavioral perspective that there's things we need to change. But as was presented, the beauty of how those colors were being processed may be different than most any other human in the world. And I want to see that grow and develop. Much like was mentioned in the first presentation by Joe, was that not every autistic is a genius, but how many of our geniuses are autistic? We want to create that opportunity. And that happens through understanding how humans develop. So autism, by definition, is a neurodevelopmental disorder. If you look into the medical diagnostic manual, it is a neurodevelopmental disorder. At least in the United States and in many places around the world, for the last 15 years, people have presented it much more as a behavioral disorder, a disorder of behaviors that need to be changed. And I want to be clear that by definition, not me up here presenting a new idea, but at the core of the definition of what autism is, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder or a neurodevelopmental difference. What this means is there's a difference in the neurology, in the way the brain is wired, that impacts development. Yes, we can see behaviors that get impacted as well, but it's not by definition a disorder of behavior. So by focusing on behavior, we actually miss where the action really is, where we can really help support the individual to grow. And so in floor time, our goal is to understand those differences in neurology and help promote the developmental process. I'm not going to say much about the research except to be very clear that the research supporting the work of DIR and the approach of floor time is very solid. There is quite good research to support floor time. You're welcome to go to our website and look at that. But I just want to be very clear because there's many that have been stuck in this idea that the only research to support working with individuals on the autism spectrum has been on more behavioral approaches. And if this was a presentation on that topic, I'd welcome a debate with any behaviorist about the research because the research is quite solid on the more developmental approaches like DIR to support individuals on the spectrum. So I'm not going to go over in that much detail about the developmental capacities, but I at least want you to be able to see them and to have some reference on what these mean. So these are the 6 core developmental capacities. Dr. Greenspan outlined 16 developmental capacities through the lifespan, but these core 6 are the real key to human development and the social emotional developmental process. The first capacity I'll talk a little bit about as an example, but it's a capacity for self-regulation and an interest in the world. The fact that you all can just sit here and be a part of this presentation without having to actively think about how am I going to stay in my chair. So if you're actively thinking about it, you're using what we would call self-control. It's driven by your cortex. It's driven by the very front part of your brain regulates your downstairs part of your brain. So you can think things. You can think, okay, how do I stay sitting in my chair? And you can come up with strategies, and it can impact the subcortical parts of your brain. But most of you aren't thinking about it. Most of you are just sitting here listening. And because your core regulatory system in your brain is calm, and therefore you're able to be interested in the world around you. It gives you the opportunity to take in this information. Whether you like it or you don't like it, but you get the opportunity to take in the information because you're regulated and you don't have to just think about it and learn or train. No one really trained you or taught you how to be well regulated. Someone might have taught you what's polite and how you do some of the social interaction and how maybe you even sit in the chair and what's the proper polite way, and there's cultural implications to that. But no one really taught you how to be well regulated. It's something that developed through human interaction in a very natural way. So we go through these developmental capacities, starting with regulation, engagement with others, and then we get into communication. And communication's, again, much more than language. With our young children, before they have language, they're communicating a lot. And so it's getting that communication going, getting into problem solving, starting to develop the understanding that someone else has a different way of seeing the world than me. And how can I interact with that? So the child starts to understand that mommy and daddy don't see the world the way I do. They actually have a different idea than me. And so I might want to build the tower really tall, but daddy wants to build the tower as a flatter building. And that's a different idea than I have. And so we start to be able to interact with those ideas and develop the capacity for then thinking and reasoning and abstract thinking. The ability to think abstractly and to handle abstract concepts starts with pretend play as little children. It starts with playing with dolls and playing with trucks and what they're doing and how they're doing it, and making up stories in our mind builds the capacity for abstract thinking. So when we talk about floor time with young children, it looks playful, it looks joyful. And you could say, well, all you're doing is playing. But if I'm getting that child's mind to be able to think abstractly in more complex ways, I am setting that child up for all sorts of success in life, whatever they choose to do. And the other part about doing it from a floor time perspective is we're following what the child's interested in. And that's in part why we're so well embraced by the neurodiversity community, because we're not saying, this is how I define what you should do, and so you do what I say. It's, yes, we all have rules, and children have rules they have to follow, but that I respect and value the individual differences of that child and help them grow kind of on their terms. So we have a short video here that is about 4 families that experienced our home program and coming to our institute in, we have an international institute in the States, and this is their experience, and all of them had experienced some form of more behaviorally focused intervention before they came and began to get more developmental floor time therapy.
Every kid on the spectrum is different. Although he's not talking, he should be able to point to things. He should be able to look at us, but he was not doing that.
She would be in her own world, not want to interact with us.
He didn't interact too much with other people than myself and my husband.
It was clear to me that the relationships with peers were kind of suffering. He wasn't able to do some of the things that his friends could do at school, and it was really frustrating to him.
When we started this whole world of assessment, we took Kevin to different clinicals in hospitals.
It was definitely much more of a behavioral approach to things.
If they want to use a candy to get my child to do something, I say that's not okay. I don't want him to work for candy.
It's like training your kid to do the right thing instead of getting into the root cause. It didn't feel right at all.
That was extremely exhausting, to the point that I called my husband one day, crying out in the car, and I said, we need to find a new way.
I chose DIR because it's just so much deeper and so much more intrinsic. DIR stands for Developmental Individual Differences and Relationship Based, so it's really meeting kids where they're at.
And when we walked into the room, Kevin liked slipping the lights. They started doing it with him. That's how they got him from one room to the other room to the other room. I did not sweat one drop. So that was a magic moment of...
Then we made Colette.
That changed
That
everything.
just changed everything.
We need a screwdriver.
I see families through our home program, meeting wonderful people from all over the world and supporting them in learning floor time and learning how to get that just right ooey gooey-ness with their child.
What's been so different with floor time is just people seeing her for the amazing child that she is.
Zebra. Elephant.
I love elephants too. The name floor time comes from this idea of getting down on the floor and playing with a child. It just symbolizes following a child's lead.
We don't think about it as training the child to do something. We're trying to create the opportunity that she can also develop and interact with others and connect with others.
Most people move pretty fluidly up the developmental ladder, but some people get stuck We don't know why. And so the way that those folks continue to move is we figure out where's the capacity where you need support so that you can bring what's already inside you out. It's not an artificial thing. It works because it is what human beings do.
Any child on the spectrum, they'll just go further and further and further into their world. And active and involved play, that's what brings them back to you.
When I started doing floor time, it was like, oh my gosh, she's in this with me again.
He just does really sweet things, like he'll come up to me and he'll kiss both of my cheeks and just be like, you know I love you, Mom.
The intervention that I am 100% sure works for Kevin is a play-based floor time approach, 100%.
He might still get stuck in things, but he still wants us to be there with him, thinking about where he started, and now it's huge.
So those parents didn't talk about what their children learned, but they talked about how the world in many ways unlocked for their child. And through this more affectively rich interaction, we can help that happen. And so in floor time, you will see a different type of approach than just teaching. It's much more about connecting in this interaction. So we're going to watch a little floor time interaction between a therapist and a small child. And I'll talk through a little bit about what happens and why it's so important. The noise that you will hear is in the background. There isn't really any verbal communication between the child and the therapist. So the noise it's a very busy room and it's all in the background. Hopefully. So what you're going to see in this, and just go ahead and play it when you're ready, and I'll stop talking. What you're going to see in this interaction between the small, there we go.
You say bye. Bye. Not yet, we're waiting. I'm looking at pulling that even out today. Yeah. Oi, that was cheeky. Yeah, I saw that. Watch your feet, Michael. Oh wow. Oh wow.
So he's got eye contact. He's looking right at her. He's touching her face like he's almost never seen it before. And so we often talk about individuals on the spectrum lack eye contact. And if you think about that behaviorally as something that needs to be trained, you might train the individual to look at me when I'm talking. But what she did was help develop the capacity for engagement, that he was with her in this interaction. And what did he do? He looked right at her. And he touched her face almost like it was something very novel, very new, like he had never seen it before. And I wonder how much he actually is able to take in people's facial expressions, because the way he covers his ear, I'm guessing that his world is very overwhelming a lot of the time with the sounds and probably visually as well. But when she stays in this connection with her and creates the opportunity for him to engage with her, somewhat on his terms, she doesn't force it. If you watch the video again, you'll see even when she holds out her hand, she holds it out about halfway. If it was a game of table tennis, she would be just having her hand at the net, saying, I'm here when you're ready to engage with me. And he develops the capacity to begin interaction with another human. He reaches out to her and he grabs her hand. And he's now developing the capacity to be able to interact with others. And so there's so many beautiful things happening in this interaction that is just absolutely essential for his development and to create the opportunity to learn information, to learn skills. But this is about developing the human, developing the person from the bottom up. As Dr. Greenspan once said, every child has the potential to be great. It's our job to make a great world where that potential can flourish. And that's what I've dedicated my career to and my work to, is working to create that great world where that potential can flourish. And this neurodiversity process that's happening here, I think is going to be wonderful to help that foster. Thank you.
Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. So in the beginning of the session, I talked about, if you look at the connection with the general education, I think you would understand right away. But I've been working with the internet for a long period of time. And I've visited many Japanese schools, like junior high schools, and also schools in Japan and in the US. And children ask, what is internet useful for? And I ask the child, what are you interested in? And the child would say, I'm not interested. And I would say that the internet will be not useful at all. But as Jeff mentioned, there are a lot of information on the internet, but they're also experts. You can be connected to the experts using the internet. This is a way of learning in the age of abundance. In the past, where there is a mass manufacturing, you go to the factory and we needed a lot of people who can do the same thing. But now with the automation, with the robotics, we don't need people doing the same thing. But rather, by having people doing different things, internet is going to be even more useful. And if you are not interested in anything, internet is not useful anything or not useful for learning, as was mentioned earlier in the presentation by Jeff-san. Teachers provide coaching in effect and also do the encouragement, but children can collect information from the internet. And that, but yet the educational system has not changed much. At Media Lab, just like Jeff showed, we are thinking of how we can unlock children. And I think it's the same with all the countries. Children who are ready to obey the instructions given by the teachers and the parents. But today, young people today, if they learn to do that, when they grow up, they will lose motivation. They don't know what to do if they're just obeying the instructions given by the adults, which I think is very important in the general education as well. So what I would like to do is floor time is a therapy for autistic children. So they do a lot of researches in brain science, but could be used for atypicals as well. So I would like to build hybrid schools with Rizuki-san to utilize this. So what we have been doing in educational system is how we can convey information. But so I would say that there are many things that are more advanced in the education of children with autism. So I think we can learn. General education can learn from education provided to autistic children, like floor time. So I'm very excited. And as Rizuki-san mentioned earlier, we do have many volunteers. We have professional therapists. We have many people who wanted to participate. So we would like to have some discussions, and we would like to continue this process. So if you can provide us with a feedback, I would like to identify how we can engage people more. So I hope that you would join us in the breakout session that would follow my speech. Thank you. Thank you very much.